The digital revolution is merely the latest in a long line of information processing revolutions stretching back through the development of language, the evolution of sex, and the creation of life to the beginning of the universe itself. Each revolution has laid the groundwork for the next, and all information processing revolutions since the Big Bang stem from the intrinsic information processing ability of the universe. The computational universe necessarily generates complexity. Life, sex, the brain, and human civilization did not come about by mere accident. Seth Lloyd, Programming the Universe, 2006.
Welcome back to the Wild Globalization Project. In our last conversation, we heard Louis-Vincent claim that, quote, in this new information economy, wealth creation is, for the first time in history, the result of something, information, knowledge, which is in unlimited supply, which has a marginal cost of zero, and which questions the whole intellectual framework of economics, unquote. Wild Globalization hears Gave, but we're reaching outside economics to the confused Klondike sardine trader. Remember him? Quote, but thems were trading sardines, unquote. Or Alvin Toffler's prescient claim that, quote, a market is not simply an economic structure. It's a way of organizing people, a way of thinking, an ethos, unquote. We're searching for Benoit Mandelbrot's, quote, rough and wild randomness, unquote. So we're tracking how this new information economy, including AI, is just the latest symptom of something economics alone can't answer. It's the wilder question of value itself, human value and human value creation. We're claiming that human knowledge value has been the game for now, what, 1 million years? Humans have always been about knowledge. Who's got it, who's getting more of it, and what are they doing with it? And once we get it, how do we manage it? Like sardines in the Klondike. What the heck is going on when these humans take the given world, say a river, but then dream up a kayak, a paddle, and our wild and crazy kayaker? A quick roadmap note. Today's talk is our longest and wildest dive into the wild globalization river, because we're going to see how and why this human knowledge value thing is, in its heart and soul, getting wilder. To recap wild globalization, we've noticed how humans are a unique life form. First, we're intelligent creatures who create. Science, life-saving medicines, the Mona Lisa or Beethoven's Ninth, and now artificial intelligence, AI. Or not. That same intelligence destroys. Industrial-scale warfare, genocides. It disappeared entire ecosystems. It committed unthinkable atrocities. Second, we're considering how humans can care, protect, even die for those we love. And we can be amazed and in awe of Earth's spaces and creatures, or not. We can just as easily in the same lifetime be vicious and wantonly hateful and destructive. Finally, we've also noticed that humans aren't unnatural, rather we're hypernatural. We take what nature gives us, but then we can't seem to leave it alone, so we come up with, voila, the kayak and the kayaker. We're freaks, maybe, but somehow, some way, we're still, quote, of nature, unquote. Being smart and caring and hypernatural are the strategies that have worked for us, or not. For good and bad, there's 8 billion of us running around the planet today, living longer and with more to eat, so something's working. Today, the question we're asking for our own and Earth's future is, how does knowledge, value, really work or not? So recall how we've tracked the 19th and 20th centuries, how they began with 1 billion humans on the planet, how they seemed to promise global cooperation, prosperity, and amazing new technologies, steam power, continental railroads, electricity, telephones, automobiles. But then how it all seemed to collapse into chaos, global wars, pandemic and famine, genocide, holocaust, environmental destruction. Like never in history, the 19th and 20th centuries created and destroyed human lives and cultures, ecologies, and creatures. Incredible value was created. Industry, consumer economies, cities, populations, food abundance, national parks, medicines, genetics, spaceships. Farmers and ranchers turned North America's Great Plains into a breadbasket for the world, but overran indigenous peoples and along the way, casually, for sport and industry, slaughtered 60 million magnificent bison. Oppenheimer's team invented the atomic bomb and, quote, saved civilization, unquote. Californians and Russians turned magnificent Tulare Lake and the Aral Sea into dust bowls. Value given, then created and destroyed in the same sweeps of history. And then, what? Still, wildly, 6 billion, quote, modern humans emerged into the 21st century, hell-bent to hyper-globalize trade and prosperity with a rising tide of wealth, foodstuff abundance, and even more amazing technologies. Today, the global family is the largest and measurably the healthiest, best nourished, and most prosperous in history. Okay, but this prosperity has exploded so wildly that it's unevenly distributed, and people are on the move in immense global migrations, 1 million every week moving to cities, triggering demographic reversals, with too few young to care and pay for the old. Humans threaten, and we are threatened as never before by the Earth's wild ecologies. The possibility of climate change, yes, but other even bigger stuff like ice ages, geomagnetic storms, or catastrophic volcanic winters if or when the Earth's mega volcanoes go off. Hateful wars rage again in the Middle East and Europe. COVID-19 wreaked havoc and killed millions. This all boils down to a much grittier, down and dirty question. To what value do humans bring to the planet or not? What creates human value or not? How and why do humans create and destroy it so easily, so casually? Human genome, voila. Tulare Lake and the Aral Sea, poof. Moonshot, Apollo. Hiroshima, poof. Breadbasket, voila. Bison, poof. So what is human value in our 21st century time? What the heck is going on? Virtue and knowledge. In Wild Economy, Thomas Sowell and others reminded us how humans create value by observing, learning, thinking, experimenting, testing, failing, and finally succeeding, innovating. For 8,000 years, agriculture has grown more food because it grew food-growing knowledge. Human value, like more food, begins with smart, clever people. It begins with knowledge creation. So what we're tracking and bushwhacking here is value itself. What works? What makes things easier? Which of the natural world's challenges are we responding to? We're tracking a knowledge that works theory of value. But history's horrors slap us in the face and remind us that it's not just knowledge that works, it's knowledge that works or tries to work for the good, the benefit of humanity and life on planet Earth. It's really knowledge that works virtuously. It's virtuous knowledge. Curiously, virtue and virtuous mean good, beneficial, and wise. Mother Teresa virtuously, lovingly, cared for the sick and dying of Calcutta, India. Virtuous also means an effective force or power, as when we say, by virtue of. Responding to human suffering, Mother Teresa acted decisively and pragmatically. She dignified the pragmatic practice of hospice care around the world. Today, 5,000 missions of charity, nuns give care in 133 countries. Knowledge creates human value. We see it and buy it on Amazon or at the grocery because it works. This creation, movement, and transaction of products creates economies. But the final product, the smartphone or the atomic bomb, are not the magic. They're the rabbit coming out of the hat, but the magic is the magician's sleight of hand, or the inventor or entrepreneur's or farmer's practical knowledge, value, creation, or Mother Teresa's leadership and inspiration. It's Beethoven's or Mozart's genius, or Ford's or Musk's organizing brilliance, or the collective intelligence of the thousands who worked the Manhattan Project. So behind all material value, what we see and touch, or buy and sell, behind the product is the knowledge value chain. Data from experience, new, surprising, even game-changing information gleaned from the data, and then new knowledge from understanding and interpreting the new information. It's knowledge value that responds to, adjusts, and then innovates and builds something for what life puts out there. Knowledge builds the bus and knowledge drives the bus. The knowledge mystery, freedom, consciousness, knowledge in the Garden of Eden. So if knowledge value and innovation are so incredible, so hypernatural, if we think we're so clever, how or why can they be so volatile, so unpredictable, even mean or ruthless? Tracking the incisive 20th century economist Joseph Schumpeter, what does it mean to call knowledge innovation's constant disruption of civil societies and economies the, quote, incessant gale of creative destruction, unquote? It's more than curious that the originating creation myth of Western civilization, that is, the folks who more or less led humanity into this very wild, so-called modern, tech-bound, scientific, industrial age, the story told for thousands of years in various versions by three of the world's great faith traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It's curious how the story introduces the world in essentially three storylines. First, God's creation of the universe and life on earth, including human life. Second, the story of Eve and Adam being tempted by the mysterious serpent and sweet or bitter fruit of the primordial tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Finally, it tells how, upon tasting the fruit, Eve's and Adam's self-awareness, their consciousness of themselves, the garden, their nakedness, in fact, this created world, and so their unique being, their human being, is transformed, like the butterfly's metamorphosis from the chrysalis. Expelled from the garden and eternal life, they are now free, or condemned to be free, to eke out a radically different life outside the garden. and we may surmise that they now possess new and unique powers, this seemingly unrestrained yet awesome freedom, this mysterious new consciousness, and this new knowledge of good and evil. Whether one is God-fearing or not, faithful, religious or not, devoted to the teachings of Moses, Jesus, the Buddha, or Muhammad, Krishna, or for example, America's indigenous people's Great Spirit, or not, the message appears to be that this freedom consciousness knowledge, how humans get or sneak it, how we are blessed or condemned to it, how we use or abuse it, is the cardinal mystery and power, the force of the human experience since time immemorial. And it still is. This mysterious story of human freedom, consciousness, knowledge only begins in the mythic garden. Even more curiously, the modern theoretical sciences, mathematics and physics, the engine of the Enlightenment industrial age, figured this out on their own without reference to God or the gods or any divinity, mythic story, or garden or serpent, as recently as the early 20th century. In 1929, the young savant, mathematician, and logician Kurt Gödel, who would become a best buddy of Albert Einstein at Princeton, shocked the scientific community with his incompleteness theorems, which demonstrated that mathematics, science's most essential and foundational logic, could neither prove nor disprove its own validity or consistency. In a nutshell, you couldn't use math to prove math. Gödel's logic followed from Werner Heisenberg's famous quantum uncertainty principle, which states that in any recursive self-referential system, mathematics, physics, or information theory, as Alan Turing and Claude Shannon would later add, or Jacques Derrida's critique of human language would intone in Western philosophy, the system can't use its own logic to prove or measure the foundation of its own logic. As George Gilder sums the conundrum, quote, "We can't use photons or electrons to measure photons and electrons." This is most transparent when we try to think about language systems and the simple meaning or definition of any word. The meaning of any word is always a beautiful, indefinite plenitude of reference to other words. Now, if you're building the Golden Gate Bridge or the Burj Khalifa or Apollo, this all seems trivial. The bridge and Burj stand. Apollo flies, usually. But if you're doing knowledge theory or trying to come up with the core principles of mathematics or physics or information or language theory, the bedrock epistemological strategies of civilization, and in particular our modern age, including Newton's seminal Principia Mathematica, and now AI, well, it can't be trivial. It's as if Heisenberg and this parade of thought leaders rediscovered and gave new life to the serpent in the garden's thought grass. Science is not held back from pursuing its amazing discoveries and practical innovations, like the human genome or modern medicines or AI. But it has lost its luster as the preeminent bedrock of apodictic truth value or knowledge. Under our civilized noses, the Heisenbergs, Gödels, Turings, Shannons, or Derridas restored the mystery and wildness of human knowledge. Knowledge, how we do it, get it, know it, how it yields certainty or not, remains, alas, Nonetheless, in spite of its shining and elegantly tangible achievements, as mysterious as Eve's first taste of it. Science can build Golden Gates or Burj Khalifas or spaceships to Mars or miracle genome-based pharmas. Yet it can't really be certain or fully explain how it knows or does all that. So, to get a grip on this wildness, let's look at everyday stuff and experience. Let's look at history. So why is knowledge value wild? Consequences and externalities. So why can't we keep a lid on knowledge? Why are humans always running to catch up with their innovations? How is it that Wozniak and Jobs from their garage can dream up personal computers and smartphones, but many of us are now lost, even dehumanized, in a new social media wilderness? Knowledge, it seems, creates unpredictable, often unknowable consequences, or the new catchword, externalities. External simply means that a new idea or innovation likely carries outside or unknown costs, both good and bad. Smartphones connect us to each other, to culture, to music, art, literature, science, all positive externalities. But you can also learn bomb making. Ukrainian soldiers are using Musk's Starlink to coordinate battles. The cobalt in our EV and smartphone batteries is likely dug up by modern cash slaves paid by Chinese middlemen in the Congo's open pit mines. All positive and negative externalities. Same device. Or with 8 billion logged in and online, we need lots and lots more energy and electricity. So the planet's probably getting warmer. We assume that's a negative externality. Okay, but wait a minute. Warmer also means wetter and greener. It means the planet is greening. So more food and less famine for the 8 billion. It's even wilder. Recall how the 2016 Potsdam Institute study reports that our Anthropocene age might actually be skipping the next ice age. Quote, "It is mind-boggling that humankind is able to interfere with a mechanism that shaped the world as we know it," unquote. Skipping an ice age? That's wild. And how would 8 billion hungry humans survive a 100,000-year-long ice age anyway? So is global warming a negative or positive externality? Both? While globalization is not saying that human-caused climate change is good or bad, we're saying it's obviously good and bad. We're noticing how knowledge creates unknown consequences and costs. It's wild, but it's always been wild. It's our hypernature. Recall paleoanthropologist Beth Shapiro's prescient observations about these positive, negative, externality-breathing human creatures.
Within the last 50,000 years, our ancestors hunted, polluted, and outcompeted hundreds of species to extinction. They turned wolves into Boston Terriers, wild cabbage into broccoli and cauliflower. Some species survived their encounters with humans, but many did not, and all were transformed in some way. Our ancestors figured out how to break the rules, to work together to overrule chance, to help others, to determine their own evolutionary trajectories and those of the species with which they interacted. Paleoanthropologists still don't fully understand how this happened. But this is what it means to be human. Beth Shapiro, Life as We Made It.
So we're clever at breaking the rules and changing the game, but do we really know where it's taking us? Do we control the consequences or externalities of our ideas and innovations? History gives us a hint. Take human agriculture. Folks, probably smart women, were just trying to innovate food security when they started cultivating grains and husbanding animals. Did they realize that agriculture would eventually settle people into cities, that larger social groups would bring amazing and creative synergies, but also urbanization, crowding, and pandemics and famine when crops failed, or competition and at the extreme, cruel warfare when we couldn't get along? In just my generation's lifetime, China's 1958 to 62 Great Leap Forward may have claimed good intentions, but the ensuing agricultural catastrophe it triggered, coupled by poor weather, starved 20 to 50 million citizens to death. Or Eli Whitney, who truly believed his labor-reducing cotton gin would speed up the end of human slavery. But cotton production and labor demand exploded, and slavery may have been extended by decades. Or recall how two Bell Lab physicists made one of history's most important cosmic discoveries, evidence of the Big Bang's background radiation. But they were really just cleaning bird poop off their radar. Only later, as an afterthought, a consequence, did they realize that the feedback buzz was actually the Big Bang's remnant radiation, its afterglow. All these moves were made by economy, science, and governance innovations with good intentions. But as we can see, ideas and innovations are launched into an unknown and unpredictable future. Taleb warns that we need knowledge from the future itself to predict the future. When we cook up ideas, they then carry us along for the ride. Human knowledge value and its consequences are always ahead of the game, ahead of our ability to know or fully govern their impacts and costs. We're always catching up. Why is knowledge value wild? Knowledge hides. Every thing in Shapiro's observations above shows up as physical evolution: wolves and terriers, cabbage and kale, or in modern experience, cotton gins, famines, Big Bang noise. But here's the thing. We're easily tricked by the tangible, touchable, seeable physical world, the hardware. But it's always human learning and knowledge, the software, that's constantly exposed and learning to adjust and direct the physical world's risks and opportunities. It's the hyperphysical, the hypernatural human mind, living miraculously in brain synapses, DNA on paper and now digitally, that sneaks along, gathers more of itself, and radically changes the evolution game and the rules. All our cousins in the deep past had the same brain capacities and the same natural resources that we do. But they were starting further down the knowledge pecking order. They had to work their way up and out. They had to learn and accumulate all the knowledge value we take for granted today. Just watch the Naked and Afraid shows to see how ridiculous and vulnerable modern humans are when we're thrown into the wild with no tech and no grocery stores. The no clothes thing is just to get our attention. But here's the catch. Knowledge that works, value, that is innovation, hides in the physical world that it changes and manipulates. We see and use the results, the products, but the knowledge, the ideas hide underneath and within the smartphone or rocket or grocery supply chain. Data, information, knowledge hide in the physical, just like the human body's biological information hides in DNA and nerve synapses. Consider the microchip, or CPU, the central processing unit. that runs our smartphones, laptops, our cars, everything. Pound for pound, it's probably the most valuable thing out there today. But as George Gilder observes, quoting the tech guru Gordon Moore, quote, "The silicon, oxygen, and aluminum used in microchips are the three most abundant elements in Earth's crust. They are dirt cheap because they are dirt. Virtually all the value of the semiconductor and optical industries comes from the knowledge they embody, the learning accumulated over time," unquote. So the hardware chip is not the real stuff. The stuff to make the CPU or the biochemical compounds that make your DNA, that's not it. Even the electronic signal moving through the CPU or the DNA's neural transmissions are not it. It is not physical, material. It is intangible, not just hard, but impossible to touch. It is the data information knowledge chain. It is what theologians and philosophers have called for thousands of years the logos. It, knowledge, is the essence of the garden. Its subtle mystery hides in the garden. It is revealed by the serpent or Gödel's theorems. It is the human imagination's play in knowledge-value creation. It's Seth Lloyd's account of information processing revolutions through the history of creations that we quoted at the onset of today's talk. Albert Einstein thought it was a miracle. Yet curiously, lots of smart people have been fooled, bedazzled by the things that knowledge value creates. Early modern economists like Adam Smith, who favored the market, and Karl Marx, who favored labor and governance, both focused more on the labor and capital that went into material production. They overlooked Joseph Schumpeter's later notice of the perennial gale of new ideas and innovations that incessantly drive and disrupt and reset human cultures. Smith and Marx were hard-pressed to explain the overwhelming creative power of the new industrial economy. Smith reached for the market's mysterious invisible hand, and Marx admits in his seminal text, Capital, quote, "The whole mystery of the form of values lies hidden, even in the most elementary form, and its analysis is our fundamental difficulty," unquote. Knowledge, the force that creates these amazing, transformative yet disruptive innovations. Knowledge itself can't be completely pinned down in its material or physical texts and gadgets and products. Smith and Marx both tried to explain economy in touchable terms. Marx even as a hard science. But it turns out that invisible hands or elementary forms could not account for the Enlightenment's and the Industrial Revolution's black magic. Consequently, human knowledge value, how we measure it, how we transact it in markets, simply can't be reduced or explained in physical terms in the same way we do physics or biology. It wasn't industry or coal or oil or steel or mass production labor or capital, all good, bad, creative, destructive, incredible, horrific externalities. They didn't lift human populations from 1 billion in 1804 to 2 billion by 1927, or 6 in 2000. No, it was the meteoric advance, good and bad, of knowledge. So why is knowledge value wild? Knowledge defies measure. Science very cleverly measures the physical world. Atomic clocks measure time using the, quote, resonant frequency of atoms. Information is measured in bits or binary digits, 1, 0, or yes, no. Mark Mills observes how, quote, sensors now measure down to the bottom of nature. Instruments can even listen to the motion of individual bacteria, unquote. So you'd think the value of human productivity that drives modern civilization could be measured. Economists tried tracking what's called total factor productivity by measuring three things. First, capital, money, how much of it was invested in the economy over time. Second, labor, or how many people were working in how many jobs. And third, innovation. How much did new techs change or improve production? Capital and labor were hard data, quantifiable. Innovation, not so easy. Innovations are ideas, new ways of doing and making things. So innovations only show up as after effects and improved efficiency, those sly and slinking externalities. But here's the trick. Economists thought that if capital and labor could be measured quantitatively, then tech innovation would simply be the residual, the extra, everything added to capital and labor. Consider the progression of human artificial lighting technology. In 1750 BC, olive oil lamps produced about 17 lumen hours per BTU, or British thermal unit. By the 1800s of the Common Era, someone discovered whale oil was twice as efficient, so sperm whales were in big trouble. Thankfully, kerosene, fossil fuel, and then electricity, powered by fossil fuel coal, came along in the 1880s and saved the whales. Today, LEDs produce lighting in the tens of thousands of lumens per BTU. Good deal for the whales. Artificial lighting is now so cheap and plentiful that, alas, our urban night glows now obscure the Milky Way. Okay, so lumen hours per BTU tells us the how much, but not the how. That's the innovation productivity question. Robert Solow, a Nobel economist, decided to measure the capital and labor inputs in the US economy from 1909 to 1949. The data showed that about 12% of productivity growth could be hard measured by capital and labor, or capital per worker. So innovation had to be what was left over, the 88%. It's now known as the Solow residual, or what we're calling the knowledge innovation value residual. But that means that nearly all economic growth from 1909 to 1949 couldn't be measured directly. It was there, like the smiling whales, but what made them smile? Economists realized that the Solow residual, quote, was really a measure of our ignorance, unquote. The answer is, it was knowledge that works, intelligent innovation that advanced lighting technology. The smiling whales were delightful, quote, ethics by accident, unquote, externalities. And as artificial light advanced from olives to LEDs, capital and labor nearly vanished in the capital-labor innovation equation of artificial lighting. Imagine if we were still growing olives or hunting whales to power our smartphones and EVs. And Marx's mystery of the value forms, voila. The mystery of the value forms can be interpreted as knowledge value that works, but also that hides, Marx's mysteriously, in the physical world. It's Eve's and Goodell's serpent in the grass. But then, wait a second, if LEDs or Model Ts didn't exist when people read by olive oil or walked everywhere, can we really pull a measuring stick from that world to measure or guess the value of an LED or a Model T? That world had no metric, no way even to imagine, let alone measure, the LEDs or the Model Ts or the smartphone's value. Those gadgets were out there, as Taleb says, in the future, unknown. Folks back then couldn't know what they would know and discover. So human knowledge innovation is not just hard to measure. When the new gadget, like the smartphone, takes over, it overwhelms the existing measure or metric of things. Cars for horses, digital for paper, atomic bombs for bows and arrows. The old way's metric or standard disappears. So when Model Ts showed up in New York City, the 50,000 horses that provided transportation and lots of stinking horse manure were put to pasture. Urbanites were no longer breathing the dangerous, disease-ridden manure dust or wading through the rainy season's manure mud. But a new problem, externality, appeared: internal combustion engine exhaust. So try this. With an imaginary prehistoric cousin, go out and walk, say, 500 miles. At 3 miles per hour, it would take the two of you walking 168 straight hours, or 7 days, no rest, day and night. Then invite your friend on an airplane ride at 30,000 feet, while you both sit there and sip a martini, and fly that same 500 miles in an hour. What would your friends say? What could they say? How would their brain measure distance? Knowledge value, how we think and measure it, changes, and so measure itself metamorphoses, transforms. Or imagine what the great American Apache warrior Geronimo was thinking or feeling when, having been born into a horse world in 1829, he had his photo taken in a top hat driving a Locomobile Model C with his warrior buddies in 1905. And by the way, where are the Great Plains' 60 million bison in the photo? Where is modernity's soul? Why is knowledge value wild? Time and freedom in the Garden of Eden. But if capital and labor fade to the background as the whale dives back into the depths, then something else, something marvelous, astonishing, emerges in place of our happy submariner friend. Simply said, it's the creation of time and, more miraculously, human freedom. Humans have turned Eden's punishment into a hypernatural advantage. It turns out that knowledge value innovation can be measured, although still obliquely, by how much human work time it takes to pay for things, like the lighting above. Two practical, down-to-earth economists, Marian Tupy and Gail Pooley, demystified Solo's residual with a new measure, the, quote, time prices of a basket of products, of commodity products. They asked, how much time does the average earthly human need to pay for something, say energy and food? So they measured real stuff and compared that to how long people worked to pay for them. They tracked 1980 to 2020 prices for a basket of 50 products using data from the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the Conference Board. The data showed that the same work time to pay for the 50 commodities in 1980 prices and adjusted for inflation bought over 4 times as much stuff in 2020, a 300% increase in what Tupy and Pooley called personal resource abundance. Flip the equation and voila, humans had 75% more time to do something else, to produce more stuff, to learn, play, create, or, let's think, to procreate. Yes, in that same 1980 to 2020 time span, global population increased from 4.4 billion to nearly 8 billion, a 75% increase in just 40 years. And not just more people, but more people with more time, more freedom. That's really the story of the human trek from the deep savannah. It is Shapiro's wild cabbage to cauliflower, or olive oil to LEDs, or sandals to Model Ts, as we began to direct the natural world, at first gradually, but in our modern scientific industrial version, exponentially. Smartphones, cloud AI, rockets to Mars, in just 250 years or 10 generations. On the surface, we may think our fancy EVs and jet planes, all our gadgets, make us more advanced, more civilized. But then the whale leaps back above the waves. In fact, people, our things and way of life, as well as the natural world, may be more exposed, at greater risk, and so wilder than ever in civilization's brief 10,000-year jaunt out of the garden or savannah. Think 20th century chaos, world wars, flu epidemics, famine, and now our 21st century, trying to feed 8 billion on our way to 10, bitter and primitive regional wars, the possibility or likelihood that a lab virus killed millions, and now massive waves of migrants on the move to Earth's cities, where environmental stress is most concentrated and intense. Tupy and Pooley summarize the plight of our wildly globalized 21st century human condition. Here they're noticing how, as we noted in Wild Demographics, global culture is just a whale's eye blank removed, maybe 500 generations, from our garden cousins. How our clever knowledge creations and progress leave us constantly caught off guard. Quote, our ancestors' hunter-gatherer psychology prepared us to cope with a world of personal cooperation and exchange in small communities. It did not prepare us to cope with a world of impersonal cooperation and exchange among millions of people, a typical advanced economy, or billions of people, the global economy. The complexity of the modern economy outran the ability of our Stone Age minds to understand it. Yet it is that transition from personal simplicity to impersonal complexity that makes capitalism and what we're calling knowledge-value innovation so effective at producing great wealth. To complicate matters further, the extended marketplace of millions or billions of people enables enterprising individuals with value-creating ideas. Think Ford, Gates, Jobs, Musk. It allows them to amass greater wealth than they would be able to amass in small communities. That wealth inequality rubs against our egalitarian predispositions and zero-sum thinking. Finally, our tribalism helps explain why we continue to resent other nations and suspect them of thriving at our expense, even when we consent to trade with them. Unquote. Tupy and Pooley's exchange is the marketplace of both intellectual and material stuff we invent or steal, that we make and buy and sell with each other. Notice how they cleverly mix in the impact of scale. What happens when our communities morph from close-knit tribes to cities of millions or nations of billions? And they're noticing how the asymmetric growth of knowledge value creates the uneven distribution of knowledge wealth and power. Why is knowledge value wild? Virtue and virtuality. All this cooks down to the most stunning and really the wildest fact about virtuous knowledge value over its wild globalization path. Virtuous opens our senses to how the human mind and soul is itself virtual. The human imagination is the secret of what makes us hypernatural, able to invent, experiment, innovate, to change the very rules of the garden's game. We visualize, imagine, then signify, express. We virtualize data and information and knowledge into multifarious languages and symbolic systems. Shakespeare's plays, Beethoven's or Mozart's music, Chagall's or Monet's art, Gödel's mathematics, Heisenberg or Einstein's or Hawking's physics, Marie Curie or Crick's and Watson's chemistry, and now Alan Turing's or Claude Shannon's digitized algorithmic AI. But recall that Beethoven was nearly deaf when he wrote the Ninth Symphony's Ode to Joy 200 years ago. He felt the timpani's rumble and listened to its symphonic magic in his imagination. Yet, as we've noticed, trying to grasp the virtual is like trying to hear the music in Beethoven's imagination. Consequently, AI is just the latest version of this human virtual reality. That's because humans have always lived and breathed for hundreds of thousands of years in the virtual imagination. Recall from our wild demographics talk the magnificent 50,000-year-old cave art that spelunkers are finding all over the globe. The imagination is our edge. It's our competitive advantage in the garden's or evolution's game. It's the fruit we carried out of the savannah or Eden. We're doing it now. We're visualizing, virtualizing, we're imagining wild globalization. We recreate the real world, the world out there, into the human. E equals mc squared. That is, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared, world. We virtualize the world into a human virtual world, a new real, a hypernatural world. Our virtuous knowledge world is then vigorously tested, questioned. Einstein's general theory of relativity continuously butts heads with Max Planck's quantum theory, and the beat goes on. Science advances because, at its best, it's one of the freest examples of theologian Bernard Lonergan's, quote, pure desire to know, unquote. And the deeper our knowledge, the wilder it gets. Virtuous, virtual knowledge imagines, signifies, communicates, manipulates, creates, destroys, and transforms the world. Hubble's eye on the universe, the human genome, the Manhattan team, AI, the Taj Mahal, Mona Lisa, or Beethoven's Ninth. Or, as we'll see next chapter, credit default swaps, collateralized mortgage obligations, flash crashes, great financial crises, booms and busts. That's it. That's why and how we are different and dominating and dangerous. We recreate creation and value. The human imagination is the wildest, boldest, the most brazenly powerful, the most hypernatural of our human abilities. But here's the wildest catch. As we conjure up and then build this incredible knowledge-bound world, we have to step back and notice how and where knowledge lives and works on us. How, in fact, knowledge takes on a life and a force of its own that often, even routinely, reaches beyond our control. AI is merely the latest, if perhaps the most awesome, because it's knowledge, example of wild knowledge that lives, that breathes algorithms, and so manipulates our lives and transacts our economies beyond our full or rational control. Knowledge, value, and power take us along for the ride. In our next talk, we'll turn to where virtual knowledge value lives and transacts, to markets, money, capital, and finance. Applied economic knowledge value lives in so-called hard markets, where the hundreds, thousands, millions, and now billions of us buy, sell, transact, where deal by deal economic value is adjudicated, hard-shaked, yet only fleetingly for the moment until the next deal. It's where knowledge value takes on a life of its own, to derivatives of derivatives, to logarithmic speculation, to trillion-dollar global companies larger and more powerful than most countries. Or it's where the serpent slyly slithers out of the knowledge power shadows to expose massive and profligate government debt. Our question, what the heck is going on, now turns to markets, money, capital, and finance. You'll need more popcorn. Watch for our Wild Globalization book coming out in 2025, or find us at substack.wildglobalization.com or wildglobalization.com. Thank you.